Awesome. All righty. So where we're going to pick up today is the chapter More About Alcoholism. And it's on page 30. So what I really love about this chapter is a lot of times further on in the book, it's going to suggest that we read this chapter, because this chapter really bears down on the hopelessness of the alcoholic's dilemma. And we're really going to see a real focus on the mental obsession, which again is that insane thought that I have before I take that first drink, that insane thought that tells me this time will be different, nobody will ever know, just whatever that insane thought is. And so we're going to go through this chapter. It's going to give us a lot of review about the allergy. And we're also going to see, oh, this is exciting. Oh, I was like, we got a Packers fan and a Steelers fan. I'm like, Sparks. I got all excited. Anyway, glad you're all here. It's good to see you again. And so we're again, for those that came late, we're on page 30. We're in More About Alcoholism, and we're really going to have a look at the mental obsession. And also, one of the things is, as alcoholics, is people who go through this book, we don't just kind of learn by information. We learn from the experience, strength, and hope of each other. And so in this chapter are so many different stories. And what we're going to do is, when we get to the stories, we're going to see the symptoms of the cycle of alcoholism. And if you're just joined us and you don't know what I'm talking about, we'll do a little review before we go into the story of what the cycle is and what we're looking at. And ultimately, we're seeking to see the hopelessness of the alcoholic's dilemma. So after that introduction, let's dive in. All right, so it says More About Alcoholism, chapter 3. Most of us had been unwilling to admit we were real alcoholics. Was that my experience? No person likes to think he is bodily and mentally different from his fellows. Now, again, when we talk about being bodily different, what we're talking about is the physical allergy, that phenomenon of craving, that thing that kicks off in me once I take a drink. So non-alcoholics, they do not experience this allergy, not even once. And so that makes us bodily different from our fellows. And when it says, and mentally different from our fellows, what we're talking about there is that mental obsession, that insane thought that I have, again, when I'm as sober as I am today, that tells me I can go back to that first drink. See, if I had any other allergy, I wouldn't have a mental condition that tells me to go back to shellfish or go back to peanuts or have some legumes or drink all of the milk if I was allergic to it. There's something abnormal about how our brains work in relation to that insane thought that tells us, no, I can get away with it this time. Welcome, we're just on page 30. So it says, therefore, it is not surprising that our drinking careers, and I will say only alcoholics make a real career out of it, have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove we could drink like other people. And to be a vain attempt is to be fruitless, to be not productive, to be not successful. Has not my drinking career been proven that I don't drink like other people, but I try and try and try all these ways to exert some sort of control? It goes on to say the idea that somehow, someday, he will control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. And what I want to say about that is that great obsession, what we're really talking about there is the mental obsession. And when it talks about control and enjoy, I don't know about you guys, but when I was enjoying my drinking, I was not controlling it. I was off and there were no consequences, or very few. But when I'm controlling it, when I'm at a situation where I can only have maybe 3 drinks, oh, it is awful. I've set off this allergy and it is painful, absolutely. And so that idea that control and enjoyment could exist together, when I look to my experience, I'm like, oh yeah, that's never happened. That's never been something that happened. And oftentimes we'll joke about, like, hey, if they had a cure for alcoholism, like a pill, I'll take 2, I'll see what that'll do. But also, I wouldn't want to drink like normal people. What I want is that ease and comfort, that relief, that release. And they don't seem to have that. And it says the persistence of this illusion is astonishing. Again, that illusion is the mental obsession. That's what it's referencing. And it says many pursue it into the gates of insanity or death. And here's my experience. I show up and I show up to this thing and I think I'm going to be an up to alcoholic. I think I'm going to pursue this thing. I can tell that alcohol is causing me problems. Hey, welcome. We're just on page 30. I can see that alcohol is causing me problems. I can see that alcohol is hurting me and hurting my loved ones, but I'm not going to let it get that bad. You know what I mean? It'll get bad, but I won't end up in that consequence, or I'm not going to die from this thing, or I won't drink myself into wet brain. No, I won't let it get that bad. But I always want to emphasize many pursue it into the gates of insanity or death. Page 30. And it's that into. Because if I have alcoholism, I don't have the ability to choose whether it will be up to or into. I don't have any human power to stop me from going insane or dying from this thing. If I have alcoholism, it is eventually into insanity or death is my reality. And I don't think so when I get here, and that's the kicker. And now this next line, we learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. And if you're writing in your book, you can make a note that that is step one. And what does it mean to fully concede? And that idea, that full concession, it's not really, there is an element of an intellectual surrender. I have to know what we're talking about. What the heck does it even mean to be an alcoholic? And we spoke about it a little bit at the start of this chapter. And we spoke about it, time and time again throughout this study. But to be an alcoholic is to have the physical allergy. When I take that drink, it takes me and I need more. And the more that I drink, the more that I have to drink. An experience in my life with that mental obsession that, man, I go back to it time and time again, even though it's destroying my life. And I love that it talks about fully conceding to our innermost selves. I'm not trying to convince you I'm an alcoholic. There's no entry for membership, like no entrance exam, no performance review, no obstacle course. I'm not trying to convince my sponsor. I'm not trying to convince you, because you don't need to be convinced. I need to convince me, because I am the one that needs to be convinced. It doesn't matter whether I have alcoholism or not. If I don't think I have alcoholism and I do, I will be into the gates of insanity or death. And so to fully concede to my innermost self, that is that deep and profound surrender that within myself, I have this thing. I have these symptoms. And I don't know about you, but I'll just kind of share what my step one experience was. Because my step one experience was not good news. Like me fully conceding to my innermost self that I was an alcoholic, that was not good. Because my experience was, I came off my last relapse and it wasn't the worst thing that have ever happened to me. I didn't burn it all to the ground this time, but it was this deep inner knowing. There was nothing that I could do to stop it from getting as bad as it got before. That inevitably I would get to that place where it was absolutely pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization again. And that was inevitable. And for me, my step one experience, and I really talk about this quite a bit, my step one experience was not, I will never drink again. My step one experience was the concession that, oh my goodness, if left untreated, if left in the state that I am, I will drink again. A relapse is inevitable and is imminent, which means it's happening. It's going to happen. And there's nothing I can do in and of myself to stop it. And that was my step one experience. And in step one, when it talks about that we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. My life is unmanageable because when I drink, I cannot control the amount that I take, and I drink beyond these lines in the sand, and I drink into these horrific consequences. And I do these things I would never want to do. And then I swear off because I don't want to do that. And then my life is unmanageable because everything that I try to put between me and that first drink fails, and I pick up again. And that time, and this is my experience, that time that I have in sobriety is so painful and so awful. It's just what it's looked like for me. It's like there's a hole in the depth of my soul, and that's where the screaming is happening. And it's like I'm an exposed raw nerve ending, and it's like the wind is blowing, and I am in agony. And that is how I feel sober until I get that thought that tells me to take that first drink. And that for me is the pinnacle of unmanageability. I can't live drinking, and I can't live sober, and both are pure hell. And so that is step one. It says the delusion. So mental obsession, that denial, that no, I'm somehow like you. No, it's just been a couple bad years. No, my problem was tequila, but I can try beer. That delusion that we are like other people or presently maybe has to be smashed. Sometimes I like to turn little sayings, not the common ones, not like happy, joyous, and free, but like boiled as an owl. I like to turn those into like shirt designs. And I always thought delusion smashers, like that'd be a real good shirt, or like a real good like metal band or something. Like, yeah, welcome to the stage, delusion smashers. Woo, yeah. But that's what we're talking about. That idea that like somehow, some way, I don't have this thing. I gotta smash it. I gotta crack this thing wide open. And it is when I am cracked open that I'm able to receive the gift of God's unconditional love and grace. And that's me getting ahead of the deal. But I've got to come to the end of myself, or realize that I've come to the end of myself before I grab onto the hope that is immeasurably on offer. And it says we alcoholics are men and women who have lost the ability to control our drinking. And a little cliff note, and I say this a lot, but anytime in this book I see the word control, I can think the physical allergy. So again, if we're making notes, lack of control is the physical allergy. And anytime it talks about choice or lack of choice, we're talking about the mental obsession. So it says that that we have lost the ability to control our drinking. I don't have the ability to control the amount that I take every single time. That's gone. And it says we know that no real alcoholic ever recovers control. And sometimes you go to the rooms and you'll hear people say, you know, the saying, you know, once you become a pickle, you can never become a cucumber. And we laugh and we laugh and we, you know, it's funny. But the reality is, if I can't control my drinking, the amount that I take every single time, there is no way for me to get that control back. And that's understanding that if I have the allergy, I have the allergy. And we do not have a cure for the allergy. And it says all of us felt so immediately. And that's what I love about this book. It meets us where we're at. We're like, hey, hold on. I had this 2-month period back in 1982 where I was able to drink like a lady. Or this one time, and it's usually, in my experience, it's this one time back in what would it have been? Maybe 07. And I went to the bar and I had 3 drinks like a lady. And it says, yes, all of us felt at times we were regaining control, but such intervals usually brief. Those moments where I felt, no, I got a handle on this thing. No, I got some control. Was that usually brief, especially in the grand scheme of things? And is this our experience? We're inevitably followed by still less control. So it just took off again, which led in time to pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. And I think that's something that as alcoholics, as people come into a big book study like this today, we understand that feeling of being absolutely demoralized and not understanding how I got here. Just broken. It says we are convinced to a man. And that phrase, to a man, what that means is without exception. So we are convinced that without exception, alcoholics of our type are in the grip of a progressive illness. Over any considerable period, we get worse, never better. And I can look at my own drinking history, my own drinking, my own using, whatever brings us to the study here today. I can look at my history and I can say, is that my experience? over the course of the years, did it get worse and worse and worse. And we have that experience of people who relapse and they go back and they come back to the meetings and they tell us, every single time I picked up where I left off and it was worse than it was before. Every single time we hear that, right? And so what we know is that this disease is progressive. It does not get better. It only gets worse. And when we look at the cycle, we can see how it gets progressive in that way as well. So I think what I'll do just in this moment is just a quick review of the cycle for those of you who have maybe not seen it before or not super familiar with it. And it comes from the doctor's opinion. It's on page XXVIII. And what I want to do is I always want to start when I look for examples of the cycle in my own life. I want to start with that firm resolution. That time when I came to that morning after and said, that's it. I am never going to drink again. And I swear it off and I say, I'm not going to drink. And what I'm left with is that restless, irritable discontent, as Dr. Silkworth described it, that feeling that I have when I'm separate from alcohol. And I'm in that anxiety and that depression and that loneliness, that spiritual malady. And then I experience that mental obsession, that illusion, delusion, that insane thought that tells me, no, this time will be different. No, I'll go for 3 drinks. No, I'll go for 3 days. I'll get it back together tomorrow. It's just been a couple rough days. I've got to get it out of my system and I'll have a real good surrender tomorrow. That insane thought. And I pick it up for that ease and comfort. And then off I go. It triggers that allergy, that lack of control, and that leads me into the spree, right? That physical allergy being that phenomenon of craving. Once I drink, I need more, and the more that I drink, the more that I have to drink in the spree. That's any length of time. It can be days, weeks, months, it can be years. And then what we have is that emerging remorseful. I come to that morning after saying that's it, filled with that guilt and shame and remorse, and I'm left to swearing off. But you see, the more that I go through that cycle, the worse my spiritual malady gets. I'm in more and more pain and more shame. And what I've seen is the louder that mental obsession gets. And a lot of times, I have the privilege of working with people who are identified as chronic relapsers, and I love working with chronic relapsers. Sometimes they're my favorite to work with. And we see that cycle, and sometimes the sprees get shorter and shorter and closer together. And it makes sense because that spiritual malady is fueling that mental obsession. I'm in so much pain and I'm grabbing for the only thing that I know that has ever worked. And so as we go through these stories, we'll go through them looking for these symptoms of the cycle. And I'll stop the share right there. And so when we talk about this disease being progressive, I don't know about you guys, but this is just my experience, is that my disease has been progressive also in sobriety, not having taken a drink or a substance for many years. And it's just something that I've been very aware of and very noticed. And what that looks like for me today is that I can't get away with the same fears, the same resentments, the same defects of character, the same inaction. In fact, I do far more in my sobriety today than I did in that first year. And so it's like I don't have the same pain tolerance to live, and anger and resentment and fear. And it's like I have to deal with it a lot faster. And if you're new, that maybe doesn't seem like a message of hope. Like, what? I don't have this pain tolerance. But what I will say is it's a gift of this program, because having a shorter pain tolerance and having the tools that lead us to the solution means I get to lead into the solution and I get freedom from that. But yeah, I've just noticed that the more I've been in this thing, the more that I get to do this thing, because I don't want to live in that pain that I was living in even a couple of years ago. So there's always growth. And so just that we get worse, never better in our alcoholism, in that same notion, there's no upper limit to recovery, if that makes sense. Like there's no glass ceiling to this way of life. There really is more and more freedom on offer. And often it is the pain that motivates me to seek that freedom. So it says, we are like men who have lost their legs. They never grow new ones. And so once I have reached this point of hopelessness, there's no going back. There's no turning back. And so again, if I have the allergy, I have the allergy, just like any other medical condition, right? I can't now suddenly regrow a limb. If I have the allergy, I have the allergy. And it says, neither does there appear to be any kind of treatment which will make alcoholics of our kind like other men. We have tried every imaginable remedy. Hey, has this been our experience? Maybe, and I didn't try everything. I'll be honest with you guys. I did not try everything. But every remedy that I tried, did it fail? And it says in some instances, there has been a brief recovery, followed always by a still worse relapse. Has that been my experience? And it says physicians who are familiar with alcoholism agree there is no such thing as making a normal drinker out of an alcoholic. Science may one day accomplish this, but it hasn't done so yet. And one of the things that I love is in the next chapter, we're going to talk about, how maybe one day we'll put man on the moon, right? And then we can be like, yeah, we did that. We just had another rocket that launched around, and they're trying to get to Mars. And we've had a rover on Mars up there so long it died. And I don't know about you guys, but I felt sad about that. So we have this incredible, scientific, heck, we're from all over and we're meeting on these little squares here today, right? The science has grown, and yet that statement is true today. We don't have a cure for alcoholism that doesn't for alcoholics. Now there's a number of other treatments, but for those who need this solution, we haven't found anything else that has worked. And I think that goes to the power that and really the powerlessness of alcoholism and the power that I need to gain access to as an alcoholic. And it says, despite all we can say, many who are real alcoholics are not going to believe they're in this class. Has that been my experience? No. I always really related to that potential alcoholic. I'm like, no, I just potential. The joke I always say is it's the only time in my whole life I'm like, potential, yeah. Right. I was hoping I was just a little bit alcoholic. You know what I mean? It's like being pregnant. Yar, you know what I mean? It's not a little bit. You're there. So it says by every form of self-deception and experimentation, and that self-deception and experimentation is again a beautiful description or metaphor for the mental obsession. So I'm lying to myself. I'm trying this experiment. I don't know about you guys, but I sometimes had some concoctions that I thought could have been the solution. If I mix this drink with this drug, maybe I can get a handle on this, right? And they will try to prove themselves exceptions to the rule, therefore non-alcoholic. Has that been my experience? I'm trying all these ways to just prove that, no, I'm not this thing. And it says, if anyone who is showing the inability to control his drinking can do the right about face and drink like a gentleman, hats are off to him. And it's one of those things when I'm working with sponsees and they think, no, or they say, no, I think I can drink. I think I can control it this time. Ultimately, there's nothing I can say. You know what I mean? I can offer hey girl, when we were talking about the cycle, it didn't seem like you could. But the truth is, if there are people who are able to control it, that is the humility we show up to it with. If you can, awesome, do it. And if you can't, we're here. And it says, heaven knows we have tried hard enough and long enough to drink like other people. That was my experience. And it says, here are some of the methods we tried. And what I love is this is a sentence. And we'll see the progression of alcoholism in this whole sentence. And we can ask ourselves, have I tried these things and have they not worked? It says, drinking beer only. Have I tried that? Has that failed? Limiting the number of drinks. I'm just going to have 3, or I'm just going to stick with 6, or we're going to slow it down by 12. Depends on how realistic we are. Maybe it's 4, right? Never drinking alone. Have we tried that? Never drinking in the morning. Drinking only at home, which there's fewer outside consequences. You know what I mean? You don't get to see me ruin my life. It's a quieter thing, right? Never having it in the house, never drinking during business hours, drinking only at parties, switching from scotch to brandy, switching the drinks, or even sometimes switching the substances. Drinking only natural wines. I mean, they have antioxidants. How could that be hurtful, right? Yeah. And now what we're seeing, so all of those are examples of ways in which we try to exert control over the allergy, or where we try to exert power over the allergy. And as my experience, everything that I tried, maybe it's having water in between drinks or having a big meal or all those things that we tried, did they not work? And inevitably that allergy took over, right? And if I, I'm at that place, I have no control. Now, then it goes on to talking about all the ways we try to use some control, some power over the mental obsession. So what it's saying is we're trying to not drink. And what's our experience with this? So it says, agreeing to resign if ever drunk on the job, taking a trip, not taking a trip, swearing off forever, with and without solemn oath, taking more physical exercises as we approach January, the gyms will get filled, reading inspirational books, going to health farm sanitariums. Now, when we read health farm sanitariums, we can think treatment centers, rehabs, psychiatric facilities, inpatient, sober living houses, all those places, accepting voluntary commitment to asylums. Again, detoxes, treatment centers, psych wards, emergency rooms. And again, we see the progression. We see where we go to that realization we can't control it. We can't control the amount that we take, and we are trying to exert some power over picking up the first drink, and it doesn't work. And it says we could increase the list ad infinitum. So we could continually, like, we could all unmute and list things, and like a never-ending list of all the ways we tried to control our drinking and all the ways we tried to stay sober on our own power. And here's the thing. As alcoholics, I mean, we show up with a lot of denial. And there are a number of ways in which we can diagnose alcoholism. I think the best and most powerful is to look at the examples from our life of the cycle. Those examples where I had experience with the allergy, I had experience with the mental obsession. But if I don't want to do that, it's going to give us a suggestion, something we can try. So here is our first test to see if we're an alcoholic. Says we do not like to pronounce any individual as alcoholic. Now, I will point out, it says we don't like to pronounce any individual as alcoholic. Doesn't mean we're not good at it. I'll just point that out. You know what I mean? We can spot each other. So we don't like to pronounce any individual as alcoholic, but you can quickly diagnose yourself. So we don't want to do the cycle. We just want to, have an experiment, run an experiment. And welcome, we're on the very bottom of page 31. So it says, step over to the nearest bar room and try some controlled drinking. What that looks like is go to the bar and drink three. And then it says, try to drink and stop abruptly. Now, I want to point something out about that abrupt stop. That abrupt stop is for a full 24-hour periods, because I would be like, yes, I had an abrupt stop when I went to the washroom. You know what I mean? That's my abrupt stop. No, 1 or 2 drinks, stop. Stop for a full 24-hour period, right? And it says, try it more than once. So really see. And it says, it will not take long for you to decide if you're honest with yourself about it. It may be worth a bad case of the jitters if you get full knowledge of your condition. And it's one of those things that almost every sponsee I've ever worked with, when we get to this part of the book, I'm like, so what do you think about that suggestion? And inevitably they're like, oh, I don't even need to try that, right? I know what'll happen, and we know what'll happen. And here's the thing. Why it's sometimes people are like, why would they say go out and drink? And today when there are people who are using substances like fentanyl, where it can be quite fatal quite suddenly, like, why would we suggest that? Well, the reality is, if I have this thing, I will drink again. I will drink again. And I will pick up that drink. And if I'm doing so, at least with that idea of like, hey, if you can control it, you would. Maybe that will help build that surrender. But yeah, the reality is if I have alcoholism and I do not have the spiritual experience that is promised as the result of these 12 steps, inevitably I will drink again. So that suggestion is, hey, if we don't do this thing, if we're alcoholics, we're gonna drink anyways. And yeah, my experience is almost everyone who comes here is like, oh yeah, I don't even need to do that. I don't gotta run that experiment. I know, we've done it, right? And it says, though there is no way of proving it, we believe that early in our drinking careers, most of us could have stopped drinking. But the difficulty is that few alcoholics have enough desire to stop while there is yet time. We have heard of a few instances where people who showed definite signs of alcoholism were able to stop for a long period because of an overpowering desire to do so. Here is one. So now what we're going to do is read the story of a man of 30. And one of the things is I'm a little bit of a nerd. And I like to know who's who and like who's the story about. And a lot of times you'll see the man of 30 referenced in Richard Peabody's book, The Common Sense of Drinking, and it would be page 123 to 124. And it's possible it came from that reading, from that book, but it wasn't a perfect fit. So it's also equally likely that this was just an alcoholic that Dr. Silkworth had worked with and tried to help and had this experience with. So both are equally likely. So and as we go through this story, what we'll do is we'll try to see, and I'll point out the cycle, right? And I'll point out where the symptoms of the cycle are and where we might see them. So, and one of the things too is, I'll just say, a man of 30, the age of 30 is used a lot in the big book. And I know I look like I'm 12, but when I got here, I was, well under 30. But the nature of this thing is you get to continue to grow. And like, I remember when I got here, I'm like, man, at 30, oh, so old. Paige, I'm well over, not well over, but I'm over 30 now. And I'm like, oh no, my sweet summer child. Anywho, a man at 30 was doing a great deal of spree drinking. He was very nervous in the mornings after these bouts and quieted himself with more liquor. He was ambitious to succeed in business, but saw that he would get nowhere if he drank at all. Once he started, he had no control whatever. And very much right there, what we see is the physical allergy. Once he starts, he has no control. And we see that, like, hey, if he's drinking himself into a position where he's experiencing that morning anxiety again, that is likely a symptom of the physical allergy. So it says he made up his mind that until he had been successful in business and had retired, he would not touch another drop. And that is a beautiful example of a swearing off. He's saying, that's it. Until I am successful in business, I will not drink again. And it says, an exceptional man. He remained bone dry for 25 years and retired at the age of 55. After a successful and happy business career. Now, what I will say is, on the face of it, bone dry, what that very, very literally means is that he did not touch a single drop. He was bone dry, did not touch a drop. But also, and this is maybe just my interpretation, and maybe I'm reading a little bit too into it, but when I hear bone dry, what I hear is bone dry. You know, those old timers in the meetings that haven't done steps in a long time, and they have their chair and they're still real bitter that like newcomers don't have ashtrays to clean. And you don't want to have a cigarette too close to them because you're worried they're going to go up like tinder, dry and miserable and cantankerous and just dry. That's how I read it. I'm not saying that's what it's saying. That's saying how I read it. Now, he remained bone dry for 25 years and retired at the age of 55 after a successful and happy business career. So he achieved his goal. And then it says, then he fell victim to a belief. And falling victim to a belief is again another synonym of the mental obsession, where we believe the lie. And I think this is important, a belief with which practically every alcoholic has. And that's a big warning. That his long period of sobriety and self-discipline had qualified him to drink as other men. That was his insane thought. Now, he probably did not have the knowledge of alcoholism that we do today, and he didn't have the privilege, obviously, of this book. But here's a man who exhibited the allergy, and he exhibited amazing control in terms of his business life and the ability to have tremendous willpower in this area of his financial success. But we're going to see the progressive nature of this illness. And again, that reminder is, if I have the allergy, I have the allergy, and there's not ever going to be a time when I can ever safely drink again. And by that same token, if I have the mental obsession, inevitably I will believe a lie that tells me I can drink again, unless I continue to have and grow that spiritual awakening. So, out came his carpet slippers and a bottle. So he's starting out with some real dignified drinking. You know, he's a classy guy. In 2 months, he was in a hospital, puzzled and humiliated. Again, that is a sign of the allergy. And we can also see the progressive nature, because at no point before he swore off, before the age of 30, did it say he ended up in a hospital. But in only 2 months, the allergy took him to a place where he was hospitalized for his drinking. He tried to regulate his drinking for a while, so he tried to exert some control over that allergy, making several trips to the hospital meantime. And that's not working. It says, then gathering all his forces, he attempted to stop altogether and found he could not. So he's swearing off again and saying, I am not going to drink again. Now it says every means of solving his problem which money could buy was at his disposal. He was a man who was successful in business. He's got money in his retirement. I mean, he was able to retire early. He's got willpower in all these other areas, but he cannot stay sober. Every attempt failed. Though a robust, so a healthy, well man, at retirement, he went to pieces quickly and was dead within 4 years. Again, that progressive nature of the disease. And I've seen what happens when people who have substantial time of sobriety go back out, and it gets really bad and really ugly really quickly. And so again, it's if I have, and this is how I look at it, if I have a little bit of abstinence today, and if I've got a little bit of window of willingness to take some of these actions, by these actions, what I clearly mean is the 12 steps. Man, that's a gift. That is a gift. And it's like, man, I don't know when I'll ever get that window of willingness again. So what I want to do is dive into this work. Dive into this and get well very quick. It does not take long to get well in AA, in 12-step, following these directions. It does not at all, to have that experience so that I can stay sober. Because if I don't and I relapse, I don't know if I'll be able to come back. And that is the power of this disease. And that is the reality of this illness. And it says this case contains a powerful lesson. Most of us believe that if we remain sober for a long stretch, we could thereafter drink normally. Hey, that was my experience. You know, if I could just put it down for this length of time, I'll somehow be able to drink normally. But here it's a man who had 55 years found he was just where he left off at 30. We have seen the truth demonstrated again and again. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. Commencing to drink after a period of sobriety, we are a short time as bad as ever. If we are planning to stop drinking, there must be no reservation of any kind, nor any lurking notion that someday we will be immune to alcohol. And that no reservation of any kind, I always want to underline that. And when I work with sponsees and we get to this line, what I want to do is I just want to ask, hey, do you have reservations? And if you do, I'm not going to shame you and yell at you and scare you, because one, I can't do that, and two, that wouldn't help. But if we have reservations, we can work with them. It's also important to know what are examples of reservations. Now, this is talking very specifically about, I'd like to have a glass of wine on my wedding day, or when I retire, I want to be able to drink, or when I'm 80, I want to use black tar heroin like a lady. Those are examples of reservations, right? But other ones that I've seen and even that I've experienced have been, if this person dies, I don't know if I can stay sober. If I lose my health or my home or my job, I don't know if I can stay sober, right? Those are examples as well. We can also have reservations about the program, which is to say, yeah, I'm willing, but I don't know if I want to make that amends, or I don't know if I want to, do a fifth step. And so because I've seen this book meet us where we're at time and time and time again, when people do have reservations, and oftentimes they don't but people say no, but they tend to. If we're able to be honest about what they are, we can then bring that to prayer. So if I have that reservation of wanting to do heroin when I'm 80, I can say, God, help me to see the truth about this. Help me to surrender this to you. If I've got that reservation of what happens if I lose this thing, can I stay sober? I can take that to prayer. God, help me to see the truth that if I rely on you, I can stay sober through this. And when we get to the inventory process, we can take those fears through. And we can see how if we rely upon our higher power, that really will allow us to match that calamity with serenity. And again, if there are actions of this work that I don't want to take, maybe it's so interesting. When I got here, I didn't share. People would call on me and I just say, no, thank you. I wouldn't even say I'm an alcoholic. That's too much talking in front of people. You know what I mean? And I never thought I would do, share my story, or I never thought I would do what I'm doing now. Those were reservations that I had. And here we are. It's happening. But also I can ask, God, relieve me of those fears. I can take those fears through, and I can always, always, always pray for willingness. And that's that kicker. If I pray for that willingness, I'm already there. You know what I mean? If I don't pray for the willingness, we might be real stuck. But if I'm willing to at least pray for the willingness, there's some positive spiritual action, and we can always work with that. So much so that we'll see that being a direction in and around step 8, in and around step 6, that is a direction that we have. So if I'm struggling and I have reservations, that's okay. Let's bring them to our sponsor. Let's bring them to God and let that light in. And it says, young people may be encouraged by this man's experience to think that they can stop as he did on their own power. We doubt if many of them can do it, because none will really want to stop, and hardly one of them, because of the peculiar mental twist already acquired, will find he can win out. And that peculiar mental twist is, again, a synonym for the mental obsession. An inability to see what is true. What's true is once I drink, off I go for what is false, which is, now this time it'll be fine. And I believe that lie. And it says, several of our crowd, men of 30 or less, that used to be me, had found themselves, had been drinking only a few years, but they found themselves as helpless as those who had been drinking 20 years. To be gravely affected, for this disease to be fatal, for us to be in a hopeless position, one does not necessarily have to drink a long time, nor take the quantity some of us have. Again, what makes us alcoholic is not the consequences of alcoholism. I mean, that's what I thought. I came here and I was like, well, I've not had any DUIs. Didn't have a driver's license, and I know you can have DUIs without a driver's license. I'm very aware that those two things can exist together. I didn't have a divorce. I hadn't been married, and that codependent hostage situation, we weren't going to break up yet. There was still air in those tires, I thought, right? But it is not the consequences that make me an alcoholic. What makes me an alcoholic, very simply, is when I drink, do I have the ability to control the amount that I take every single time? Do I have that physical allergy that takes off in me? And when I honestly want to, when I've said I'm not going to drink again, or even I'm not going to drink at that party, or I'm not going to get drunk before court, have I picked up again? That's what makes an alcoholic. And if I have both of those two things, I am hopeless. It doesn't matter how young I am. It doesn't matter how old I am. It doesn't matter how rich I am. And it doesn't matter the consequences. And I always say, if I can relate to Bill on page 2, page 8, Bill Wilson is inevitable because the disease is progressive. If I do not have those consequences and I continue to drink, which I will do if I am an alcoholic, I will get those consequences. And it says, this is particularly true of women. I really like that line. I was like, potential female alcoholics. Yes, well, yeah, we're speaking to me. But the potential and the female, absolutely, often turn into the real thing and are gone beyond recall in a few years. That was my experience. Certain drinkers who would be greatly insulted if called alcoholics are astonished at their inability to stop. We who are familiar with the symptoms, again, lack of control and lack of choice, the physical allergy, the mental obsession, see large numbers of potential alcoholics among young people everywhere, but try to get them to see it. As we look back, we feel we had gone on drinking many years beyond the point where we could quit on our own willpower. And so if I am not sure, and that's the thing, did my willpower work? And for me, inevitably, it didn't. But it says, so this is the second way. If I'm like, hey, Paige, I don't really want to do reading the book and like mirroring my experience with the book and coming up with examples from my own life of the cycle. Oh, that sounds lame. Here's another thing we could just try. Just try this. So if anyone questions whether he's entered this dangerous area, let him try leaving liquor alone for a year. Just don't drink for a year. Just wee. If he is a real alcoholic and very far advanced, there is scant chance of success. And one of the things is that first suggestion of like, here's how we can see and diagnose ourselves. It's testing to see whether or not we have the allergy. And this second test is testing to see whether or not I have the mental obsession. Now, it goes on to say, in the early days of our drinking, we occasionally remain sober for a year or more, becoming serious drinkers again later. So even if I have a period of sobriety, you know, usually if we're at this place, it was years ago, it's a good indication, if I can't stop now, that I can't stop. And it's one of those things. I did a big book study with someone for many, many, many years. And we had a gentleman who came, and I always remember him because he had such a warm laugh and a warm presence about him. And after the study, he would always make a point to come up and to thank me, as well as the other person, but to thank me, which it just meant a lot. And he shared his experience of having a year dry, and he was miserable and in so much pain. And I always think of him. And I always think of him when it talks about an alcoholic death, because he was this kind, wonderful man with this warm laugh, and he relapsed. And in his relapse, he did the unthinkable, and he took his girlfriend's life. And when I think of what an alcoholic death looks like, it's not just liver cirrhosis. It's not just DUIs. Sometimes it is committing horrific crimes, and sometimes it is being the victim of horrific crimes in situations we wouldn't normally ever put ourselves in. Sometimes it looks like suicide, and there are so many ways an alcoholic death looks. And again, that is the seriousness with which, I mean, this disease is. I mean, it is a serious, fatal disease. And so it says, though you may be able to stop for a considerable period, You may yet be a potential alcoholic. We think few to whom this book will appeal can stay dry anything like a year. Some will be drunk the day after, making their resolutions, most of them within a few weeks. Again, I could look at my experience. Did I try all these things? Did I swear off time and time again? Or even swearing off those consequences? I'm not going to get a DUI, or I'm not going to lose my marriage, and lose it again, right? And do it again. And so it says, for those who are unable to drink moderately, so for those of us who have the physical allergy, the question is how to stop altogether. We are assuming, of course, that the reader desires to stop, which fair enough, right? If you're reading this book or coming to this study, presumably, because I mean, it's me nattering on for like an hour, so presumably we got some desire. Whether such a person can quit upon a non-spiritual basis depends upon the extent to which he has already lost the power to choose whether he will drink or not. And that lack of choice is, again, that mental obsession. And so there are examples of non-spiritual ways in which we can try to quit drinking. And I want to be very careful in saying that these are not bad things. These are not, there's nothing wrong with them. They're not bad. But if I have alcoholism, they will not work for me in the long run. So a non-spiritual way to quit drinking would be going to the gym, right? Gonna get buff, right? Nothing wrong with going to the gym, but if I'm an alcoholic, that will not keep me sober. Another non-spiritual way to quit drinking is to go to therapy, to go see psychologists and psychiatrists. Again, I want to be very clear. There's nothing wrong with that at all. And there's times we do need that in support of what we're doing in 12-step. We've got some stuff we have to work through, or some outside mental issues, of course. But as an alcoholic, that by itself did not work for me. And I can look at other non-spiritual ways to quit drinking, like getting into a relationship. Listen, the blue of his grippy socks matched the blue of his eyes. I knew it was meant to be, right? It was love on AA campus, right? Like, yeah, there are people, and what they need is a relationship, and that's enough for them. But for an alcoholic, I will burn that to the ground right after I start drinking again. You know what I mean? And some non-spiritual ways to quit drinking looks like getting a job or leaving that job. It looks like having a family. And that's one of those things I often work a lot with women, not exclusively, but one of the most heartbreaking things is not being, and the shameful thing is not being able to stay sober through a pregnancy, or if they're able to make it through the pregnancy, drinking shortly after, and just baffled by this. And how often we in society talk about there's nothing more powerful than a mother's love, and the shame that comes with that's not enough to keep me sober. That is the power of alcoholism. That's what we're talking about with lack of choice. Other examples include just going to meetings, include detox, include treatment centers, include all that sort of stuff. Right? And again, there's nothing wrong. And sometimes we need detox, and sometimes a treatment is good to get a couple of days of sobriety behind us. There's nothing wrong with those things. And of course, I suggest my sponsees do go to meetings. Where else am I going to find newcomers to work with, right? But by themselves, it is not enough. And I drink again. And so it says there was this tremendous urge to cease forever. Did I feel that? Like, I can't keep doing this. And yet we found it impossible. There was this is the baffling feature of alcoholism as we know it. The utter inability to leave it alone, no matter how great the necessity or the wish, no matter how much I need to, no matter how much I want to. I cannot stop myself from taking that first drink, despite all the consequences, despite burning my life to the ground again and again and again. It is not enough, and I pick it up again. And so I think actually that's a great place to leave it, knowing we have 2 minutes left, and next week we'll get into talking about our friend Jim and seeing what was going on for him and his example of the cycle. So thank you for being with us, and I'll just stop recording.